Thank you, Sue Ellen, and thank all of you for being with us tonight. And many thanks to Sue Ellen, the many volunteers. It's a small but very mighty crew of folks who make the book festival and authors series happen. So thank you. As Sue Ellen mentioned, you're no stranger to the vineyard. What do you do when you're here?
I try not to do anything. I'm pretty good at that.
Do you have any favorites? Okay, go. No, I'm going to get something out of you. What do you do?
I try to write and mostly chase my two sons around.
Okay, all right. Now, I have noticed in discussing your writing, you don't like to talk about what you're working on next. So what are you researching?
That's a better way to go about it.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I've been reading music theory for the past 2 years, and mainly because the more I read, the less I understand, and I insist on understanding it for a brief period anyway.
All right, there's something about music in the future. All right, why do you write fiction? You don't write memoir, you don't write personal essays. All your stuff is fiction of multiple varieties, which is exhausting to read about all the 30 books and the this and the that. But why do you write just fiction?
Well, I have a belief in the power of fiction to speak to the human condition. I find stories important. I think truth lies in fiction more than it lies in news and history, because fiction is the only place where you have access to everything that the characters believe, that someone has access to everything. So if it's true to the behavior of people, then it's true.
Right. Now, you don't claim to be a Southerner, but you were born in the South, you were born in Georgia, you grew up in South Carolina. Would you describe what your relationship is with the South?
Yeah, I'm an escapee. Or just to...
Some of us have more fortitude.
Well, it's true, it's true. Well, to stay in character, I'm a runaway. No, there are lots of things I like about the South. Most of them are landscape-oriented. But there are some features of Southern culture that I like. We were talking earlier, and our culture could use a good dose of the old-fashioned Southern Democrats. I don't know if I can even say Southern Democrats anymore and have it make sense, but I'm a Westerner. And as soon as I saw the Western landscape, I knew that's where I belonged.
You all can follow up on that during the Q&A. Your creative output is exhausting. You know, the books, the paintings, the woodwork, the jazz guitar. Elizabeth Alexander, the poet, was with us last year discussing her book, The Trayvon Generation. And that book is really a conversation with herself about whether she really believes that cultural expression can somehow shape a world where our children are safe. She does believe that. She believes artists are the visionaries who can help us imagine the unseen possibilities. That seems to me very important in these days and times. Do you experience your creativity as having that power? And do you share her beliefs?
I do share her beliefs. It's hard not to be pessimistic in the United States of America. But I do believe that art makes us better. If we can educate a populace that's capable of interpreting and appreciating art, then we might be able to make it. But increasingly, we sell movies and stories with the line, and I hate to preach now, but based on a true story. And it's because we've created a lazy culture where people can't take any story and construct the meaning and importance that the story generates.
Let's turn now to the novel James. Would you open this discussion specifically into James by reading something from that novel?
Since you instructed me to do so, I'll read the short section where Jim, later James, or at this moment James, has just acquired a pencil. My name is James. I wish I could tell you my story with a sense of history as much as industry. I was sold when I was born and then sold again. My mother's mother was from someplace on the continent of Africa. I had been told, or perhaps simply assumed. I cannot claim to any knowledge of that world or those people, whether my people were kings or beggars. I admire those who, at 5 years of age, like Venture Smith, can remember the clans of their ancestors, their names, and the movements of their families through the wrinkles, trenches, and chasms of the slave trade. I can tell you that I am a man who is cognizant of his world, a man who has a family, who loves a family, who has been torn from his family, a man who can read and write, a man who will not let his story be self-related, but self-written. With my pencil, I wrote myself into being. I wrote myself to hear.
Why did you want to tell this story, and how did it come to you?
You know, I keep wishing that I had, I could say that I had this burning desire my entire career to make this novel. The fact is, about 3 years ago, I was playing tennis and I hit a ball wildly out of the court. And as I watched it sail, I thought, has anyone ever told Huck Finn from Jim's point of view? Which also explained my shot. And then I went home and I couldn't find that anyone had. It turns out that a few people have used Jim as a character after the story, but no one had told this story. And I was eager to do it once I thought of it because of the depiction of Jim in Huck Finn. Like all slaves in our culture, in their depiction, the enslaved people are always superstitious, simple-minded. They eat, sleep, and procreate. We don't get pictures of them worrying about betrayal. We don't get pictures of them laughing at the ironic things that the oppressor class has done. And so I wanted to create a more true or a truer depiction of enslaved people.
Why was that important to you?
I like things to be right. Last year, it was about 3 a.m. I do stay up until that hour a lot, and on the television came an Abbott and Costello film, and I don't have the title quite right. It's something like Screams in Africa, and this was 2023, and there were black people, wide-eyed and superstitious, walking across the stage. Now, I realize that those movies have been made, but someone in some office at some network had decided that it was still okay to air it. And so I decided to get even.
This novel is written by James in the notebook of Daniel Decatur Emmett, who was a real person, and he had a minstrel act named the Virginia Minstrels that performed in blackface. And the opening pages of the novel simply state the notebook of Daniel Decatur Emmett, and it's followed by 5 pages of song lyrics that he actually wrote before we even get to part 1 of the narrative that's told by Jim. I'm very curious about the research you engaged in to create this book.
Well, I didn't have to do a lot of research for this book because I was so familiar with the text. Emmett doesn't appear in Twain's novel, but I wanted him because of, again, that ingrained racism that Americans have. These songs are horribly offensive, and they portend to be in the voice of black people. So I did read this, and I listened. The very sad part is we all know these songs. Camptown Races, Jimmy Crack Corn, all of these things are in our heads. They're a part of our cultural memory, which is sad. But my real research for this novel was to forget Twain's text. And in order to do that, I read Huck Finn 15 times in a row. I would come to the end and then go back to the beginning. I needed to inhabit the world of Huck Finn, but I didn't want to owe any allegiance to the text of Twain's. And so by the 5th reading, I was fairly sick of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and I will never read it again. But it was important. And then I turned it over and I never looked at it again. And I'm actually kind of amazed when people tell me how much of Twain's world is there, but there's not a word of Twain's.
Thank you. You've said that novels teach readers to apprehend the world as a question, that novelists deepen and broaden the question. Would you expand on that? And in what ways does James contribute to this?
Well, my real expansion of that is I'm looking for a bigger paycheck. And
I think you'll get it.
What's interesting to me is well, I would like to live in a culture where we don't have the language of difficult books. I hate it when my students say, well, that's a really hard book, in a way that states that they might not want to get into it. And my feeling is that should be an invitation. If it's difficult, well, that should be good. That should be fun. That should be a challenge. Art should be a challenge to us, not simply a comfort. When it's just a comfort, I think we become complacent. When we're not challenged, it becomes, and this is, as much as this book has done well, and that's great, I worry, I'll say something else right after this, that I'm preaching to the choir. But it's necessarily the case because I'm writing literary fiction. You know why I'm not worried about this book being banned? Because Republicans don't read books.
One of the unforgettable scenes in James is the language lesson that James gives to the children. He's teaching them how to speak and behave around white people. Some call this code switching, but this is language used as disguise. Would you talk about that and explain your device as it works in James?
Well, again, this goes back to that simplistic depiction of enslaved people, and I think it's fair to say that one of the, I'll back up and there was a film a few years ago directed by Steve McQueen called 12 Years a Slave. And I had some problems with that film. First of all, I wasn't interested in 12 Years a Slave. I was more interested in 85 Years a Slave. But there's something that happens in that film, and it's not a bad movie, but when this black man who lives free with his white neighbors in Vermont, eating biscuits and drinking tea in this idyllic depiction of his life, is kidnapped and spirited away to, I think, Louisiana. And this did happen to a lot of people, but when he's taken away, he's thrown into quarters with enslaved people. Enslaved people, oppressed people, imprisoned people will always find a way to communicate with each other that does not allow entry for their enemies. And when he is thrown in there without having been enculturated and without having lived with the enslaved, he would not understand what they are saying to each other any more than the white slave owners would. But he does. And the movie assumes that he does simply by virtue of the color of his skin. And that cheats those people, those enslaved people, out of their humanity. They are not as complex as they would be just like anyone else. And so that's where language becomes important. And James, I use standard English as the language that the slaves speak to each other just because it's my choice. Who knows what language would have been created by the people in this world to communicate with each other? I certainly would not have understood it. But in using standard English, I make a point. I'm not attempting to practice any historical accuracy here. I'm just trying to practice the telling of truth. And so when these characters are alone, they speak one way. But in order to survive, they have to satisfy the expectations and the fears of the people who own them and torture them. To speak any other way would put them in danger, and so they don't.
There's a pencil in this book. The importance of this object and the cost, its cost can't be overstated. And ultimately, James says, with this pencil, as you read, I wrote myself into being. Do you write yourself into being with your books?
God, I hope not. I suppose all writers do in some way. It's making art is my way of not necessarily expressing myself, though I guess sort of that's a logically necessary result. But it's more my way of understanding the world. I make art so I can move through the world, so I can, I write novels because I like to study things. I start studying, I make a book. The really sad part is I don't end up any smarter for this. I wrote a novel called Watershed. And to write, this is about a hydrologist. I read 25 or 6 books on geomorphology and hydrology. I did 3 months of field work with a hydrologist in the Wind River Mountains. I don't know anything about hydrology. I did for a minute, long enough to write this novel. But I think I'm better for it because I push my mind. And so it's the effort and it's a luxury. I mean, because of my work, I get to do this. But I know less when I finish a book than I believed I knew when I started. And after 30 books, I know a lot less than most people.
All right. To move to something a little lighter, tell us something about how you write. Do you go to a cafe? Do you write on your computer? You write with a pencil, a pen? You know, how do you go about creating these things?
I pile my bills on the desk. I write longhand. I write with a pencil. I prefer a pencil. I don't erase. I scratch out. And I'll write a few pages and then type a few pages because I'm a terrible typist, and to have 50 pages sitting in front of me is really daunting. So I write 5 or 6, and then type them up and edit as I go. And I like a distraction. I don't work in a cafe. I work at home. I don't like cafes. I cannot listen to jazz, and I cannot listen to certain kinds of classical music when I work because I listen to it. But I can listen to Baroque, and I can listen to, I don't listen to popular music, so I can't say that I do, but, and I can have the television on. And for the last few novels, I have watched the same 10 episodes of Mission Impossible from the 1960s over and over again. And my game is, can I spot which episode it is just from a flash of a hand? But that helps. I learned this. Isaac Stern used to practice violin with the television on in the other room. And I find that it helps me. So.
All right. So, you know, this novel, James, has turned you into something of a rock star on the literary circuit. The New Yorker has said that you are America's literary philosopher king.
What do I get for that?
The crown must be so heavy. But how do you understand all this acclaim?
I don't go online, so I don't know anything about this. I just read my books and go to work. I don't think about that. You know, it's nice. It's nice to have more readers. But you know, and we're talking about literary fiction. If they sell 80,000 books, they are excited. If I were a recording artist and I sold 80,000 records, I'd never record again. It's just crazy. A rock star. I should have trashed a few hotel rooms, but no, it's I'm just an old cowboy, and that's all it is.
You're just an old cowboy.
Yeah, I'm afraid that's true.
You really were a cowboy. Tell us a little bit about that. You really were.
I worked ranches, and I had a ranch and trained horses for about 15 years.
Were you any good?
Well, I'm not doing it now. I like animals. I like mules especially because they're really smart and you can't make a mistake. You know, but whether it's any good, it was my honor to have an animal allow me to ride it. That's how I always feel about horses. and even more so with mules because they think about it.
All right. When a reader finishes James, what do you want to be on our minds? Do you want James to disturb the comfortable or comfort the disturbed?
I didn't know I was going to have a therapy session.
But you're
Carrots.
you're the philosopher king, I got to ask you this.
I don't care. That anyone in my country reads a book is all I care about. I don't create any of this meaning. If I told you what this book meant, it should mean nothing to you because I would be wrong. A work of art is not complete until the audience comes to it. The meaning you make is as valid as the meaning anyone else makes and more valid than mine. That anyone reads this book and thinks about anything, it thrills me. If one person does, it's thrilling to me. And from reports now, I think maybe 5 or 6 have read this book, and so
I've been curious about this for a good while. In 1996, Jane Smiley made a provocative statement about race in America today, but she referenced Mark Twain's Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. And here's what she said: Jim is never autonomous, never has a vote, always finds his purpose subordinate to Huck's, and like every good sidekick, he never minds. Twain thinks Huck's affection is a good enough reward for Jim. He doesn't actually have to act in accordance with his feelings. And then she goes on to say, this is the same reasoning that white people use to convince themselves they are not racist. Black Americans understand racism as a way of structuring American culture, American politics, and the American economy. Do you consider race as the crucial and defining interest in American life? And did her 1996 critique play any role in your deciding to write James? Were you even aware of it?
I was not. Why this novel by Huck Finn is important is one reason is the use of the vernacular, of course. And it was banned in Boston not because of the word nigger in the text, but because people were upset by the way the white character spoke. It was the vernacular that bothered people so much. It's important because Huck is an adolescent America wandering through his own landscape, grappling with the one aspect of the American experience that has been from its beginning to now the most defining aspect of the American experience, and that is race. There's not a real work of art in this culture that does not deal with race. If race does not appear in it, then that absence tells us something. It's like the television show Friends. Here are 5 people, I guess it was 5, living in New York City, and they couldn't find a black person. This is how America wanted to see itself. And it wasn't a conscious thing of the writers or the producers or the actors. It's unconscious, and it's always there. So Huck Finn is not a good novel. It's an important novel. And it has its serious limitations in that it does not treat Jim as a fully realized character, but Twain could not do that. Not because he was a racist, but because he was a product of his time. He was opposed to slavery, whatever that means. Twain was telling Huck's story, not Jim's story, and I can't fault him for the failure to be more giving toward Jim, but he wasn't. He saved that for us. Then why it's a bad novel, I'll just tell you, and it's because of Tom Sawyer. And you should all hate Tom Sawyer. But Twain put the novel aside for several years, and then came back to it. The urgency of the dilemma facing Huck about reconciling his love for Jim with the fact that he was property disappears as the novel becomes an adventure story. And it does this, I'm afraid, for mercenary reasons. Tom Sawyer was Twain's money-making character, and Twain was always famously in need of money. And so he did that at the end of this novel. Would that I had a character I could go to make some money like that, but I don't. But the novel is not insignificant. It is important, and I view it as such. I don't consider James to be a corrective for anything that Twain did. I see myself as, if I may flatter myself, I see myself in conversation with Twain.
In the acknowledgement section of James, you give a nod to Mark Twain, and you reference, and this is a quote, "my long-awaited lunch with Mark Twain in hell." My imagination fails me about what that conversation would be. So what would y'all talk about?
Well, Twain said, heaven for the climate, hell for the company. And that's the source of that reference. I'd much rather be sitting there with Jimi Hendrix than Donny Osmond. I don't know what Twain and I would talk. We would certainly talk about the river, and we'd probably talk about fishing. I don't know how much we'd say about Huck Finn or James, because those are done.
All right. Well, before we engage with these wonderful people who have come to talk with you, would you read something else from James?
Oh, sure. I don't know what that would be. I'll read the language lesson.
Oh, that's good.
I apologize. I forget my books almost as quickly as they're published, and here it is. Oh, if I had only looked at the tabs that Barbara has put in my book, I would have seen one that says "language lesson" on that very page.
And that was just hopeful. I didn't know what he was going to read.
That evening, I sat down with Lizzie and 6 other children in our cabin and gave a language lesson. These were indispensable. Safe movement through the world depended on mastery of language, fluency. The young ones sat on the packed dirt floor, and I was on one of our 2 homemade stools. The hole in the roof pulled the smoke from the fire that burned in the middle of the shack. "Papa, why do we have to learn this? White folks expect us to sound a certain way, and it can only help if we don't disappoint them," I said. "The only ones who suffer when they are made to feel inferior is us. Perhaps I should say when they don't feel superior. So let's pause to review some of the basics." "Don't make eye contact," a boy said. "Right, Virgil." "Never speak first," a girl said. "That's correct, February," I said. Lizzie looked at the other children and then back at me. Never address any subject directly when talking to another slave, she said. What do we call that? I asked. Together, they said, signifying. Excellent. They were happy with themselves, and I let that feeling linger. Let's try some situational translation, something extreme first. You're walking down the street and you see that Mrs. Holliday's kitchen is on fire. She's standing in her yard and her back is to her house, unaware. How do you tell her? Fire, fire, January said. Direct, and that's almost correct, I said. The youngest of them, lean and tall 5-year-old Rachel, said, Lottie, missum, looky there. Perfect, I said. Why is that correct? Lizzie raised her hand. Because we must let the whites be the ones to name the trouble. And why is that, I asked. February said, because they need to know everything before us, because they need to name everything. Good, good. You're really sharp today. Okay, let's imagine now that it's a grease fire. She's left bacon unattended on the stove. Mrs. Holliday is about to throw water on it. What do you say, Rachel? Rachel paused. Missums, that water's gonna make it worse. Of course that's true, but what's the problem with that? Virgil said, you're telling her she's doing the wrong thing. I nodded. So what should you say? Lizzie looked at the ceiling and spoke while thinking it through. Would you like for me to get some sand? Correct approach, but you didn't translate it. She nodded. Oh, Lord, Mrs. Ma'am, you want for me to get some sand? Good. Get some is hard to say. This was from Gloria, the oldest child. The S's. That's true, I said. It's okay to trip over it. In fact, it's good. You want for me to get some sand, Mrs. Holliday. What if they don't understand, Lily asked. That's okay. Let them work to understand you. Mumble sometimes so that they can have the satisfaction of telling you not to mumble. They enjoy the correction and thinking you're stupid. Remember, the more they choose to not want to listen, the more we can say to one another around them. Why did God set it up like this? Rachel asked. With them as masters and us as slaves. There is no God, child. There's religion, but there's no God of theirs. The religion tells us that we will get our reward in the end. However, it apparently doesn't say anything about their punishment. But when we're around them, we believe in God. Oh, Lordy, Lord, we be believing. Religion is just a controlling tool they employ to it and adhere to when convenient. There must be something, Virgil said. Sorry, Virgil, you might be right. There might be some higher power children, but it's not their white God. However, the more you talk about God and Jesus and heaven and hell, the better they feel. The children sat together, and the better they feel, the safer we are. February, translate that. The more better they feels, the more safer we be. Nice.
Okay. Let's broaden the conversation. Can we have lights up and mics going around? And yes, right here in the front row. Mike, wait for the mic. Everybody else start thinking about what you want to ask. She's right over here.
Thank you. You're a professor at USC.
I am.
So you're teaching young people. Do you have optimism in terms of the young people that you're teaching, that they're starting to understand the true issues of race in this country?
Every year I see a new crop of students, and I think somebody somewhere is doing something right. I like my students. A lot of them are very bright, and a lot of them think through a lot of this stuff. I don't know if my students are representative of most college students everywhere, but I'm pleased with most of them.
And what writers do you usually teach? Do you change them every year? Or?
Since I teach fiction writing, I teach theory. I assign readings to students individually depending on what I think they need.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, next. Is there someone in this vicinity?
There's someone.
Okay, yes.
Percival. Thank you, sir. You gave me some advice in Callaloo College Station about 20 years ago. Writing, you said writing was, you were critiquing my work and you said you're treating it like kung fu or karate and it's like a street fight. My question to you now as congratulations on all your success. Does it still feel like a street fight, or are you adjusting to have a different perspective on the craft of writing? I heard your process, but when you go into it, do you feel like you're fighting for people, or do you feel like you're exercising an idea? Also, I would love to give you some gifts that I brought, but when you're writing, is it karate, kung fu, street fight still? How you feeling? I'm getting a heat check on you.
When I said that, it's you know, when you see kung fu and karate in movies, it's all choreographed and it's pretty. Making fiction is often not pretty. It's not about some beautiful spinning kick. It's about landing a punch. It is a street fight because the stakes are survival of the story. I don't care about how it reads, really. I love language, and I like a well-turned phrase, but no language ever made a story. The story makes a language.
All right, next question. Yes, over here. Are there microphones? Oh, great.
Hi, thank you for writing this. There are several times in the novel James falls into like this dreamlike state and has these existential conversations with these Enlightenment philosophers, Kant, Rousseau, Locke. Why them? I was a philosophy major in college, so I was very excited to see that, but what made you choose them?
Well, you know, Thomas Jefferson was a product of the Enlightenment, but he didn't leave any philosophical text for Jim to come across in Judge Thatcher's library. And he's taking on that Enlightenment thinking about slavery, this idea about equality that is submitted by these philosophers while they continue to justify slavery. And so that's what I'm addressing there.
And the gentleman right back there? Yeah.
Yes, I remember August Wilson once saying that his characters lived in his head, and when he was writing a play, if he would write a line, the character would say, no, I wouldn't say that. What is your process? Do your characters actually live in your head? Do they exist? Do you have a dialogue with them when you're writing?
I wish they would show up and help me sometimes. Not so much. I do. I mean, August was not schizophrenic, but he was speaking metaphorically, of course, and I guess in some way they do exist for me, but they're not nearly as helpful as for me as they were for him.
Someone else?
Hi, I have a question for you on the other side.
Where are you? Over here.
You said in the beginning of your conversation that something about the Western landscape resonated with you and that you consider yourself a Westerner. I'd love to know more about that. What was it that resonated with you, and what does it mean to you to be a Westerner?
The landscape itself is wide open with let's put this. When I come east now, it's way too green. I feel a little claustrophobic. If I go to West Virginia, I'm scared to death, because everything's in a draw. You have to look up to look out. But when I saw the Canyonlands the drama of that landscape meant a lot to me. And and then when I spent more time, and there are just fewer people, you know. Sure, there are not a lot of black people in Wyoming, but there are hardly any people in Wyoming, and I kind of responded to that.
All right, other questions? This is a very shy group. Someone back there? Yeah. Oh, two somebodies. Okay. Where's the microphone? Microphone?
Oh, it's moving up.
Oh, did you do that?
By the way, thank you for American Fiction and for this wonderful book. You mentioned in your discussion that race was one of the enduring problems of this country, probably the oldest enduring problem. Do you see or have any suggestions on a way out of this dilemma, especially given the upcoming election?
I might have expressed a little optimism until you got to the end of your question. First of all, I don't think race is a problem. Racism, yes. I think one of the problems we have is we have this idea that we should all be colorblind. And that's bullshit. People are different. If we're just comfortable with the fact that people are different, we're a lot better off than trying to pretend we're all the same. And all of a sudden we're, French. That was unfair and uncalled for, and I apologize. No, and also, I'm a novelist. Anyone who looks to me for any kind of message about how we should proceed has already gone down the wrong road. The fact that I try to make a living writing fiction is ample evidence that I'm mentally deficient. I don't know.
Who else? There were some people. Where am I missing? Over here. Where?
I have a question back here.
Where
Could
are
you, I'm sorry,
Can you stand up? I have no idea where this voice is coming from.
back here. Over here.
Oh,
Way over here.
way over here. Okay.
Could you tell us a little bit about who you're reading right now and who are the authors that you really would encourage us to read as well?
Well, there's a lot of good work. I read fiction all the time from my students, and I don't recommend that you read this. I love my students, and some of it's really good work, but it's exhausting to read so much fiction. So I read a lot of other things. Lately, I've been again reading nothing but history of music and music theory, but there's lots of literary fiction is experiencing I think a great resurgence in the culture. I don't know whether they're selling more books, but there seems to be more excitement about books. No, and some other things that I wouldn't even know about I just received a book. There are poems by Hannah Arendt. I didn't even know she wrote poems, and this is great to see these things, translations. We should be ashamed in our country that we translate so few works. It's the rest of the world makes a lot of good work, and it would be wonderful to see more of it. I can, if I may, no, I changed my mind.
All right. Next question. Yes, right here.
while we're waiting for them, may I ask mine?
Yes.
So
Where
what
are
did you
you?
think of, over here, oh, sorry. What did you think of Octavia Butler's book Kindred, which is another book that deals with slavery in a different kind of way?
Well, Octavia Butler is a really fine writer. One of the problems I had with a lot of slavery stories, and I don't know if mine's any different, to tell the truth, is what are you supposed to say when you come out of the book or the theater? Wow, that slavery was pretty bad. It changed my mind. So that's how I kind of feel about a lot of.
Somebody else? We have, yes.
Thank you very much for your work, and I wanted to know if you could talk a little bit about your experience of seeing Erasure adapted to the screen for American fiction, and also if you'd like to see other of your work adapted for a television or a movie picture.
Well, I had nothing to do with the film, which is the way it ought to be. Young man, Cord Jefferson, came to me and wanted the film rights to the novel and had no money. Those were two bad things. But I liked him a lot, and I said, sure, you can have him for a while. They had been tied, the rights for Erasure had been tied up for about 10 years for people who I was certain didn't understand the book, and I was always afraid they were going to make the movie. But Cord represented and does, along with several other people that I've met in this industry recently, something new in film. Sure, they want to make money. When I started writing 40-something years ago, I first published, people in the film industry were my age now, ancient, chomping on cigars, just talking about getting rich. And all of a sudden there's this wave of young people, men and women, who actually talk about making art. And that was so refreshing to me. And he made a really fine work. What I like is that he took my novel and made it what he needed to make it. It's a lot different from my book. But to see a whole new work of art emerge from it is nothing but satisfying.
Okay. Next question, we have time. Someone over there, yeah. Oh, three somebodies. Good.
I was curious about your youth and what kind of books you liked reading and what made an impression on you, say, up till the age of 20. And the second part of that is, during your youth, did you dabble with writing stories or poetry, or you liked words? I'm just curious about your past.
No, I never thought of being a writer. I played initially violin and discovered that girls wouldn't go out with a violinist, and so I started playing guitar. And I would go to a jazz club when I was 15 and sneak in the back, and that's I learned to play with really brutal jazz musicians who would laugh at me, and so that was my introduction to art. But books were always around me. My grandfather and my father had libraries, and I liked what I learned early on. And this is what's important about literacy and literature, is that reading is the most subversive thing we can do. Someone can sit over your shoulder and look at the very pages you're reading, but they have no idea what's going into you and what work it's doing. That's exciting. When I was 9, I read Of Human Bondage. I got it from my grandfather's shelf. And I thought, I'm not supposed to be reading this. It was, a prostitute. I didn't even know what a prostitute was. I looked it up in the OED, with the magnifying glass and everything. And after reading the description, I still didn't know what a prostitute was. But I knew it was bad, and that was good. And so that was my, that private, covert reading became really important to me.
Pass the mic. I think there were some people next to you who had questions. Yes? Yes. You got a mic? No, wait for the mic.
Sorry, could you recommend a difficult, or a book that you found difficult? You mentioned that a difficult book was to be sought after. What is a difficult book you could recommend, or one you found difficult?
Well, my students always balk at my favorite novel, which is the Life and Opinions of Tristram Shandy. It's 1741. It's the most postmodern text you will ever see. And just to give you an idea how wonderful this is, it's the life and opinions of Tristram Shandy, and in the novel, you never get past his conception. So, that's pretty cool.
Yes? So, I'm up here, sorry, up in the top.
Oh.
Hi.
Yeah.
So, when you create a novel from scratch in your own ideas, there would seem to be no limits to what you can write. When you take something from Mark Twain and you decide, I'm going to build on top and make my own story, what relationship do you have with the original story? Any responsibilities, or it's a canvas that everybody knows and there's no limitations? Just curious how you think about that relationship versus a novel you start from scratch.
There are no limitations. Even if I were to tell the story of Huckleberry Finn, in the world, from Twain's beginning to Twain's end, it would be from Jim's point of view, and everything that he sees would be different. My analogy is fly fishing. When you fish up a river, you walk and you keep moving because every place you see shows more promise. And then it starts to get dark and you think, I better go back to the car, and you turn around and there's a whole new river. And I've never made it back to my car in the light.
Yes? There's a question over here.
Thank you, and thank you both. How many people in here have read Percival's novel, The Trees? I found that very challenging. And thank you for writing it. And that leads into my question. Did the Black Lives Matter movement inform your art at all?
That particular movement, no, because that was just a new name for the same movement. In the 1920s, the NAACP had a banner hanging outside their window saying, 5 black men died today, talking about lynchings. So as much as I appreciate sort of reaffirmation of the sentiment and of the mission to bring all of this to light, it's not new, sadly.
All right, more questions, more conversation. All right. Sue Ellen, are we missing anybody? All right. You want to close us out? I want to thank you all for being here. Thanks, Sue Ellen.
Thank you, Barbara.